if you're just starting out in game development, your goal shouldn't be to get better. It should be to finish one game, because just that one game will do so much more for your skills, confidence, and momentum than years of practice ever will. So you can think of it like this. We are in game development to make games. That's obvious, right? But right now you might think that you are just practicing by making like experiments, prototypes forever, or like watching tutorials. And sure, that's like okay when you're just starting out and you're trying to learn new things, but you shouldn't overdo it. Like sure, I preach these things a lot as well, but that's actually just for learning like initially. So you learn like the initial things, but you shouldn't do it forever. Like you shouldn't do it for more than a few months when you're starting out, or like for a few weeks or months in between when you're making your games. Because your number one priority should be to make games, because that's why we are in game development. And if this just practicing would work like forever and you're just thinking, well, I'm going to make the best game ever as my first game. If you're just thinking that, you won't make the best game, because to get better at making games, to make good games, to make them efficiently, to make something that you can actually finish, you need to make small games first, small bad games initially, and then you can get better and scale them from there. Because when you're just doing experiments and prototypes, okay, that's awesome for like learning new mechanics and like new concepts, but learning to actually finish a game, make a good game, that doesn't come from experiments and prototypes. That comes from actually making small games and then scaling that and improving that. And the reason I'm saying this is because when I first got started, I didn't have it like very clearly in my mind that making my first game should be my goal, because I was in this so-called tutorial hell. That's where we watch like a lot of tutorials and we're over reliant on it for our learning, instead of our main learning resource being like experimenting and prototyping and like doing things practically. And now I'm talking like specifically for preparing for your first game, like just to get familiar with coding and your game engine and things like that, like as complete beginners. So as I said, I was initially over-reliant on tutorials for learning initially. But that was the problem, because I didn't actually learn anything from that. And you probably are in this position as well, where you're watching so many tutorials, you're using AI so much, and you aren't actually like struggling and having what we call a desirable difficulty when you are actually learning. And I wasted seriously years in this tutorial hell where I didn't learn the correct way. And my main goal wasn't to make a game, so I didn't improve like nearly as quickly as I could have. Because how we learn is by doing things actively. It's not by watching a tutorial, taking notes, like following along. It's actually by doing things actively and like solving problems, thinking, being creative, being logical ourselves. That's how we actually learn. So to finish your first game, the first step is going to be that you should be very conscious that finishing your first game should be your number one priority right now. You shouldn't like focus on getting better. Everything you do should like lead up to you finishing your first game. Everything you do. You should learn like only the necessary things to make your first game. Once you've learned that, like roughly 80% of the things you need, once you've learned that, then you should just start making your first game immediately. So like the actionable step I want you to do, have finishing your first game as your main goal. If you are a complete beginner, start experimenting and prototyping, trying to like actively learn the things that you need to make the game that you want to make. Like, don't have any huge expectations for this. Like, this is also my second point. Don't try to make GTA 6 as your like first game, because making your first game is going to take so much more time than you imagine. Like seriously, like my first game, it wasn't super small. Like it had a lot of upgrades. It had like settings, like a lot of different things that I didn't necessarily need, but that's a topic for another video. But it was a very simple game. I also used AI a lot, which is also a mistake I made, but just to like emphasize that making games takes a lot of time. Like this bad small project, my first game, which I learned a ton from, took me like, I think it was like 5 months to make. And that was a small game. You can go look at my itch.io page. The game is Neon Search. Like the game was very small. I learned a ton from it, but like I'm just saying, it takes a lot of time to actually make a game. So you should have your expectations maybe 10 times smaller than what you have right now. Your first game should be like a very simple mobile game. Like it should be like very easy, very simple. It should be like one mechanic, one theme, very simple replayability, like just a few upgrades. Very simple, something that you can finish like within 2 months. So scope every expectation you have down, maybe 10x for some of you. Because also when you're making a game, adding new features gets increasingly harder. Like it shouldn't be, but that's just the nature of making games. That adding new things is going to be exponentially or linearly harder. I hope at least linearly harder once the game scales. So once you are in the later stages, like a feature that might have taken you like 1 hour to implement in the very beginning might take you like 3 hours because you have to like implement it into all the other systems that you already have. So we talked about having your first game as your main priority. You should also have it as your goal, and your goal should be to make this game that you can definitely finish. Should be something that's not way out of your league, not something that's like way harder than what you can actually make. Should be something that you can 100% finish once you've like learned the necessary things. So you can aim for like learning necessary things by making experiments and prototypes for maybe like 1 month, and then you can start developing your game after that 1 month. Because if we learn the effective way with like prototyping and experimenting, actively learning, then we're going to learn so much faster. So I think 1 month, that's enough. That's at least what we preach inside of Smartini, like roughly 1 month. And then after that 1 month, you can start preparing and making your first game, which you can have like a deadline for like roughly 45, 60 days. And if you want to know like specifically what to add, like how to plan a game, prepare for the game, finish a game, like what the bare minimum is, like for example, like how much time you should spend on making like the core game loop, how many like bugs you should have, like because you shouldn't like focus entirely on making it 100% perfect, because then we could spend like multiple more months just by doing small things. So if you want to know like specifically how much you should spend your time on different mechanics and have like the entire process of making your first game laid out step by step, then I talk a lot more about this inside of Smartini, which is the first link in the description. And with that being said, we can go to the third point, which is to spend much more time planning than you imagine, right? So I think it's very important that you have like a very clear image in your mind about the result you want to have in hand. Like I say this a lot on the channel, but I think it's very, very important. And that's something I learned when I made my first game, which was to just have a very clear image in your mind, because then you're going to like make the systems and make the games aim towards like the end goal that you want to have, and not just like make the system to work for that very moment. So for example, when I made the movement system in my game, I didn't like make it with upgrades in mind, but I had to add upgrades because that's like essential for like replayability and having like a complete game. And also in my first game, I didn't make the systems with mobile controls in mind. So I used like the old input system in Unity, which is like harder to work with, and like the movement system was like not changeable or expandable to make mobile movement like at all. So basically I couldn't make mobile movement in a game. So if I just have known that I wanted to make this a mobile game much sooner, then I'd do like things very, very differently. So unfortunately, I had to scrap the mobile game idea because it was just so hard to actually like convert this PC game into a mobile game, because I made the game so unoptimized and like the systems was just so cluttered. So you should have like a very clear image in your mind about the end result, and you should have milestones that lead up to that end result. So maybe like 10, 15 milestones leading up to that goal. And the milestone should be like core mechanics in the game. So for example, you might have one milestone for like player mechanics, like player movement, stamina, health, all these things. That can be your first milestone, for example. Then you can have one milestone for like making upgrades, the main menu, one for like enemy spawning, world generation. Like all the critical things in your game should be like separated into milestones. And then in those milestones, you should have like different tasks. So I'm not saying like plan out all the tasks for your entire game immediately. What you should do when you're starting planning out your first game, just plan out the milestones first. So like you should separate everything you need to make like the finished game, the bare minimum, into different milestones. And then all the tasks that you're going to do is always going to lead up to that one milestone, except for bugs, obviously. But like all the tasks that you're going to do is going to lead up to one of these, like these 10, 15, 20 milestones that you're going to make. And then you don't need to set deadlines for the tasks themselves, but you should set deadlines for every single milestone, so you know like roughly how long it takes and how much you should spend on each system, and when you are actually done, so that you know that you can actually finish this within like what I said, 45, 60, 75 days, something like that. And when you're doing this planning, you're planning out the systems, the architecture of the code. When you're planning out all these things, I think you can use ChatGPT because these are like very, very essential and important things for you actually finishing the game. That's like your architecture need to be very good planned out. It needs to be like very changeable and expandable to actually finish the game, because this is going to be your first game. You don't have any experience with like making expandable code. So it's very important that you do it right. And because of that, I don't think it's like cheating or anything bad to use ChatGPT when you're planning out your systems and your architecture. So I just want to say thank you for watching this video. And if you want to have the entire process like laid out step by step for you with video courses and also a lot of tools that's going to like help you a ton on this journey, then you can click the first link in the description and join Smart Indie today. And thank you for watching.